The blood dripped from Sarah Johnson's split lip as she stumbled through the front door of the small homestead, clutching her side where Benjamin's boot had connected with her ribs. For 3 years she had endured, hoping things would change, praying that the charming man she'd married would return. But on this crisp autumn evening in 1876, as the setting sun painted Idaho City's horizon in shades of orange and crimson, Sarah knew she would die if she stayed one more night. The empty whiskey bottle on the floor told her Benjamin wouldn't be conscious for at least a few hours. Sarah moved quickly despite the pain, gathering what little she could call her own: a tattered shawl, her mother's locket, and the small pouch of coins she'd managed to hide away, 1 penny at a time from the eggs she sold in town. $10.37. All she had to show for her 25 years of life. Sarah cast one final glance around the cabin that had become her prison, then slipped into the gathering darkness. Benjamin Johnson had taken everything from her: her youth, her dreams, and nearly her will to live. But not tonight. Tonight, she was choosing life, even if she had no idea what tomorrow would bring. Idaho City had once been a booming gold rush town, but by 1876, it had settled into a more modest existence in the Idaho Territory. Still, it was large enough that perhaps Benjamin wouldn't immediately know where to look for her. Sarah kept to the shadows, her bruised face downturned as she made her way toward the only place she could think of: the small church on the edge of town where Pastor Williams might offer sanctuary, at least for the night. The church door was locked. Sarah's heart sank as she sank onto the wooden steps, wrapping her shawl tighter around her trembling shoulders. The autumn air had turned chilly with nightfall, and her thin cotton dress provided little protection. She would have to find somewhere else, but exhaustion and pain kept her rooted to the spot. "Madam, are you all right?" The deep voice startled Sarah, and she instinctively raised her arms to protect her face before she could stop herself. When no blow came, she lowered them slowly, peering up at the tall silhouette standing a few feet away. The man took a step back, hands raised slightly to show he meant no harm. "I didn't mean to frighten you," he said, his voice gentler now, "but you're sitting outside in the cold and—" His words trailed off as he moved into the light cast by the church's single lantern, revealing Sarah's bruised face. His expression darkened, but not with anger directed at her. He removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "Name's Frank Owens. I work the Peterson ranch just outside of town. I'm fine," Sarah whispered, rising unsteadily to her feet. "I just needed to rest a moment." "You're not fine, madam," Frank said quietly. "And I reckon whoever did that to your face isn't far behind. Pastor's gone to Boys for a few days, if that's who you're looking for." Sarah felt tears threatening. Without the pastor, she had nowhere to go. "Thank you for telling me," she managed, clutching her small bundle closer. "I'll just be on my way then." Frank replaced his hat, considering her with a thoughtful expression. "I don't mean to presume, madam, but my sister runs a boarding house on the other side of town. Mary's a good woman. She'd give you a safe place for the night, no questions asked." Sarah hesitated. Benjamin's warnings echoed in her mind that she was worthless, that no decent person would help her, that she'd end up in a brothel if she ever left him. But the sincerity in Frank's eyes made her want to believe there might be kindness left in the world. "I have a little money," she said, her voice barely audible. "That won't be necessary, not tonight anyway," Frank replied. "Mary would have my hide if I left a lady in trouble alone in the cold." He gestured toward a wagon hitched nearby. "I can take you there, or if you'd prefer not to be seen with me, I can tell you how to find it." Sarah glanced nervously down the dark street. Benjamin might wake sooner than expected. The thought of being found alone made her decision. "The ride would be appreciated, Mr. Owens." Frank nodded, offering his arm but not insisting when Sarah kept her distance. Instead, he walked slowly beside her to the wagon, careful to maintain space between them. He helped her up without touching her more than necessary, then climbed up himself and set the horses in motion. "Madam, I don't need to know your troubles, but I should tell you that if someone comes looking for you, Mary's place is the first boarding house they'll check. Sarah's fingers tightened around her bundle. Then perhaps this isn't wise. Frank clicked to the horses, turning them away from the main street. There's another option. The ranch I work for has a small cabin used to be for the previous foreman before he moved into town. It's been sitting empty for months. Not fancy, but it's clean and has a lock on the door. He glanced sideways at her. You'd be welcome to stay there until you sort things out. Why would you help me? Sarah asked, suspicion edging into her voice. Benjamin had always said men only helped women for one reason. My mother raised us right, Frank said simply. And I've got a sister about your age. I'd hope someone would do the same for her if she was in trouble. He paused. The ranch is far enough from town that you'd have warning if anyone came looking. And Mrs. Peterson, she owns the place since her husband passed. She's a fair woman. Might even have work for you if you need it. Sarah weighed her options, which were few. I can cook, she offered quietly. And so, I'm good with laundry too, Frank nodded. Those skills are always needed at her ranch, so what'll it be, madam? Mary's boarding house in town or the cabin at Peterson's in the distance, Sarah heard shouting. A man's angry voice carrying on the night air. Benjamin was awake and he was looking for her. Terror seized her throat. The ranch, she whispered urgently. Please? Frank didn't ask questions. He simply turned the wagon away from town, urging the horses into a faster trot. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon wheels and the steady clip-clop of hooves against the hard, packed dirt. The Peterson ranch sat nestled in a small valley surrounded by rolling hills. Even in the darkness, Sarah could make out the silhouette of the main house, the large barn, and several smaller outbuildings. Frank guided the wagon past these, toward a small cabin set apart from the other structures near a stand of pines. Here we are, he said softly, bringing the wagon to a halt. It's not much, but you'll be safe here. The cabin was indeed small, just one room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed against one wall, a table with 2 chairs, and a few shelves holding basic supplies. But it was clean, as Frank had promised, and the door had both a latch and a sliding bolt. I'll get a fire started for you, Frank offered, gathering kindling from a box beside the hearth. There's a well just behind the cabin for water. Sarah stood awkwardly in the center of the room, still clutching her small bundle. As the fire caught and began to cast a warm glow around the cabin, she saw Frank more clearly for the first time. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with a strong, sun-weathered face and clear blue eyes. He wore simple ranch clothes, sturdy trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest, but they were clean and well-mended. Mr. Owens, she began hesitantly, I don't know how to thank you. No need for thanks, he replied, straightening up from the fire. And please call me Frank. He moved to the small cupboard and removed a few items. There's some jerky here and dried beans. Not much else, I'm afraid, but I'll bring something from the main house in the morning. I don't want to be a bother, Sarah said quickly. Frank smiled, a genuine expression that softened his features. It's no bother. We take care of our own at the Peterson ranch, and for now that includes you. He moved toward the door, then paused. I don't mean to pry, madam, but might I know your name? Just so I know what to call you when I return, Sarah hesitated. If she gave her married name, it would be easier for Benjamin to track her down. Sarah, she said finally. Sarah James. She used her maiden name for the first time in 3 years, and it felt like reclaiming a small piece of herself. Well, Miss Sarah, Frank said with a slight nod, you get some rest. I'll be back at first light with supplies. He put his hat back on and stepped outside, then turned back briefly. The bolt slides easily. I'd suggest using it. After he left, Sarah secured the door as suggested, then sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the evening finally catching up with her. The tears came then, silent and hot, streaking down her bruised cheeks. She was free, at least for now, but freedom came with its own terrors. What would she do? Where would she go? And what if Benjamin found her? Eventually, exhaustion overcame fear and Sarah lay down on the narrow bed, still fully clothed. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, and somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. Different sounds from the town noises she was accustomed to, but somehow comforting in their unfamiliarity. As she drifted toward sleep, Sarah realized this was the first time in 3 years she didn't have to fear being awakened by a drunken fist. Morning arrived with soft golden light filtering through the cabin's single window. Sarah woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was. The bruise on her cheek throbbed, reminding her of yesterday's escape. She rose stiffly, her body aching from Benjamin's last assault, and moved to the small basin on the shelf. Using water from the pitcher beside it, she washed her face carefully, wincing as she touched the tender areas. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Miss Sarah, it's Frank Owens." Sarah quickly smoothed her rumpled dress and hair before sliding back the bolt. Frank stood on the doorstep, a basket in one hand and a cloth-wrapped bundle in the other. Behind him, a gray mare was tethered to a nearby tree. "Good morning," he greeted her, his eyes taking in her appearance but not lingering on her bruises. "I've brought some breakfast and a few other things you might need." Sarah stepped back to let him in, suddenly conscious of how she must look after sleeping in her clothes. "That's very kind of you." Frank set the basket on the table and unwrapped the bundle, revealing a loaf of fresh bread, a crock of butter, some sliced ham, and a jar of preserves. "Mrs. Wilkins, she's our cook-up at the main house, sent these along, and this is for you as well." He reached into the basket and pulled out a simple blue cotton dress, slightly faded but clean and neatly mended. "Oh, I couldn't," Sarah began. "It was Mrs. Peterson's idea," Frank explained. "She's about your size and she had this put away. Said she doesn't need it anymore and would be pleased if it found use." He placed the dress carefully on the bed. "There are some other things in the basket: soap, a hairbrush, a few other necessities." Sarah felt tears threatening again. Such simple kindnesses, yet they overwhelmed her after years of cruelty. "Please thank her for me. I don't know what to say." Frank smiled that easy smile of his. "No need for words. Mrs. Peterson would like to meet you when you're feeling up to it. No pressure, though." He moved back toward the door. "I've got chores to tend to, but I'll check back this afternoon. The mare outside is gentle. Her name's Daisy. Mrs. Peterson thought you might like to have a way to get around if you need to." Sarah's eyes widened. "A horse, for me to use?" Frank nodded. "Just while you're here, there's feed in the small shed around back." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Miss Sarah, I don't know your situation exactly, though I can guess some of it, but you should know that you're safe here. The Peterson Ranch is a good 10 miles from Idaho City, and we don't get many visitors." After he left, Sarah sat at the table, slowly eating the food he'd brought while trying to process the unexpected kindness she was receiving. Benjamin had isolated her so thoroughly over the years, convincing her that she had no value to anyone but him, and even that value was questionable given how he treated her. To be shown basic human decency now felt almost unreal. When she'd finished eating, Sarah changed into the blue dress. It fit reasonably well, though it hung a bit loose on her thin frame. She found a small mirror in the basket and gasped softly at her reflection. The bruise on her cheek had darkened to a deep purple, spreading up to her eye, which was swollen. Another bruise marked her jawline, and her split lip was crusted with dried blood. No wonder Frank had looked at her with such concern. She looked like what she was, a beaten woman on the run. Sarah spent the day putting the small cabin in order, finding comfort in the familiar tasks of sweeping and dusting. The physical activity helped keep her mind from dwelling on her fears. By mid-afternoon, the cabin was as clean as she could make it with the limited supplies available, and she ventured outside to check on Daisy. The mare nickered softly as Sarah approached, stretching her neck for attention. Sarah had always loved horses, though Benjamin had sold her father's old mare soon after they married, claiming they couldn't afford to feed an animal that didn't earn its keep. She stroked Daisy's velvety nose, murmuring soft words of greeting. "She likes you." Sarah startled, turning quickly to find a woman standing a few yards away. She was perhaps 50, with silver streaking her dark hair, which was pulled back in a practical bun. Her face was weathered but kind, with laugh lines around her eyes. Mrs. Peterson. Sarah guessed, unconsciously raising a hand to cover her bruised face. Eleanor Peterson, the woman confirmed, stepping forward and offering her hand. And you must be Sarah. Frank told me he'd brought someone in need of sanctuary to the old foreman's cabin. Sarah shook the offered hand, feeling awkward. I'm sorry to impose. I promise I won't stay long. Eleanor waved away her apology. Nonsense. The cabin's been sitting empty for months. Might as well have someone make use of it. Her eyes took in Sarah's bruised face, but like Frank, she didn't stare. Frank mentioned you know your way around a kitchen and laundry. Yes, madam, Sarah replied. Good, we lost our laundress last month. She moved to boys with her son. I've been looking for someone to take her place. The job's yours if you want it. Room and board plus $5 a week. Sarah blinked in surprise. You'd hire me, just like that. You don't even know me. Eleanor smiled, the expression warming her whole face. I'm a good judge of character, Sarah. Besides, Frank vouched for you, and that boy doesn't give his trust easily. So, what do you say? $5 a week was a generous wage, especially with room and board included. It would allow Sarah to save money, perhaps enough to eventually make her way to Oregon or California, somewhere Benjamin would never find her. I'd be grateful for the opportunity, Mrs. Peterson. Good, that's settled then. Eleanor nodded approvingly. You can start tomorrow if you're feeling up to it. Nothing strenuous at first, just helping Mrs. Wilkins in the kitchen until those ribs heal. Sarah's hand went to her side, where Benjamin's boot had connected. She hadn't mentioned her injuries beyond what was visible on her face. Eleanor's expression softened. I had a husband once who thought his fists were the answer to every problem. I know the signs, girl. You're safe here. Rest today and come up to the main house when you're ready tomorrow. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Sarah speechless beside the gentle mare. Twice in less than a day, she had encountered kindness where she expected judgment or exploitation. Perhaps there was hope for a new beginning after all. The next few weeks passed in a blur of new routines and gradual healing. True to Eleanor's word, Sarah started with light kitchen duties, helping Mrs. Wilkins prepare meals for the ranch hands. As her ribs healed, she took on more responsibility, eventually moving to laundry duties. The work was hard but satisfying, so different from the joyless chores she'd performed under Benjamin's critical eye. Frank Owens came by the cabin every few days, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book to read, fresh wildflowers, or special treats from town. He never stayed long and always maintained a respectful distance, seeming to understand instinctively that Sarah needed time and space to heal, not just physically but emotionally. One evening in late October, Sarah was returning to her cabin after finishing the day's laundry when she saw Frank waiting outside her door, his hat in his hands. "Evening, Miss Sarah," he greeted her. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," she assured him, surprised by how genuinely pleased she was to see him. Over the weeks, his visits had become something she looked forward to. "Would you like to come in? I was just about to make some tea." Inside the cabin, which now bore small touches that made it feel like home, a colorful quilt on the bed, dried wildflowers in a jar on the table, Sarah busied herself with the kettle while Frank sat at the small table. "I went into Idaho City today," he said conversationally. "Thought you might like to know what's happening there." Sarah's hands stilled. "Did you hear anything about him?" Frank nodded slowly. "Benjamin Johnson's been asking about you, showing your wedding portrait around the saloons, offering a reward for information." He paused. "Nobody here would tell him anything, even if they knew. The Peterson ranch takes care of its own." Sarah sank into the chair opposite Frank. "He won't stop looking, I know him. When Benjamin wants something, he doesn't give up." "You're his wife," Frank said carefully. In the eyes of the law, I'm his property," Sarah finished bitterly. I know, that's why I can never go back to Idaho City. I'll have to move on soon, somewhere he can't find me. Frank's expression tightened. There might be another way. Not all men are like him, Sarah. A divorce, Sarah gave a hollow laugh. Divorce? Do you know how difficult that is for a woman to obtain? I'd need to prove extreme cruelty, and even then the courts favor the husband, and I'd have to face him in court. She shook her head. I can't do that. I won't survive if I ever have to be near him again. Then we'll find another solution, Frank said firmly. You've made a place for yourself here, Sarah. Mrs. Peterson values your work. Mrs. Wilkins says you're the best help she's had in years, and the men. He trailed off, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. The men, Sarah prompted. They respect you, Frank continued. They see how hard you work, how you never complain despite what you've been through. You've earned your place here, and nobody wants to see you leave. The kettle began to whistle, saving Sarah from having to respond immediately. As she prepared the tea, she considered Frank's words. It was true that she had begun to feel at home on the Peterson ranch. The nightmares that had plagued her in the early days came less frequently now. She had even gained a little weight, her body recovering from years of stress and irregular meals. And then there was Frank himself. Kind, patient Frank who never pushed, never presumed, but was steadily becoming the brightest part of her days. Sarah placed a cup of tea before him. I appreciate what you're saying, Frank, truly. But I can't put all of you at risk. Benjamin is dangerous when he's angry, and he'll be very angry when he finds me. If, Frank corrected. If he finds you, and if he does, he'll have to go through me first. The simple declaration, spoken without bravado but with quiet certainty, brought tears to Sarah's eyes. Why would you do that for me? Frank looked down at his tea, then back up at her, his blue eyes serious. Because I care what happens to you, Sarah. More than I probably should, given how short a time we've known each other. The admission hung between them, neither uncomfortable nor unwelcome. Sarah felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear, an unfamiliar sensation that took her a moment to recognize as hope. I care about you too, she admitted softly, but there's so much you don't know about me, about what I've been through. I know enough, Frank replied. I know you're strong and brave. I know you're kind to everyone here, even though the world hasn't been kind to you. The rest, whatever it is, you can tell me when you're ready, or never. It doesn't change how I see you. They sipped their tea in companionable silence after that, both aware that something had shifted between them, but neither in a hurry to define it. When Frank left that evening, he hesitated at the door. There's a harvest dance in the next town over this weekend, far enough from Idaho City that you needn't worry. Would you consider going with me? Sarah's first instinct was to refuse. The thought of a social gathering of eyes upon her made her stomach tighten with anxiety, but the hopeful look in Frank's eyes made her reconsider. I don't have anything suitable to wear, she said, not quite a refusal. Frank smiled. I think Mrs. Peterson might have some ideas about that. She was quite the belle of the ball in her younger days, according to Mr. Peterson's stories. Sarah found herself smiling back. Then yes, I'd like to go to the dance with you. True to Frank's prediction, Idaho Peterson was delighted to help when Sarah hesitantly mentioned the dance the next day. Finally, the older woman exclaimed. I was beginning to think Frank would never work up the courage to ask you. She led Sarah to her own bedroom in the main house, opening a large trunk at the foot of the bed. I've been saving these, thinking I might have a daughter someday who'd want them. Never did have children, though. From the trunk, Idaho withdrew several dresses, each more beautiful than the last. She held up a deep green velvet with modest lace trim at the collar and sleeves. This one, I think, it'll bring out the gold in your hair. The dance was held in a large barn in Centerville, a small settlement about 15 miles from the Peterson ranch. Frank arrived at Sarah's cabin promptly at 6, driving a polished buggy instead of his usual wagon. He was dressed in his Sunday best, a dark suit, crisp white shirt, and string tie. When Sarah emerged from the cabin in the green velvet dress, her honey blonde hair arranged in soft curls framing her face, Frank's expression of admiration made her blush. "You look beautiful, Sarah," he said simply, offering his hand to help her into the buggy. The ride to Centerville gave them time to talk, really talk, without the usual constraints of Frank's ranch duties or Sarah's work. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about coming west after the war looking for a fresh start, about finding a home at the Peterson ranch 5 years earlier. Sarah shared bits of her own past her childhood on a small farm in Kansas, losing her parents to influenza when she was 19, meeting Benjamin when he passed through town as a cattle buyer. "He seemed so charming then," she said quietly. "So interested in everything I had to say. No one had ever paid attention to me like that before. When he asked me to marry him after just 2 weeks, it seemed romantic rather than rushed." Frank kept his eyes on the road, giving her space to continue or not as she chose. The change came gradually. Little criticisms at first, then anger if dinner wasn't exactly as he wanted it. "The first time he hit me was 6 months after we were married." Sarah stared at her gloved hands folded in her lap. "I dropped a plate. It was my mother's china, one of the few things I had from her. I was more upset about the plate than the slap, if you can believe that." "I'm sorry that happened to you," Frank said, his voice tight with controlled anger, not at her, she realized, but for her. After that, it got worse, especially when he drank, which was more and more often. He'd apologize sometimes, promise it would never happen again, but it always did. Sarah took a deep breath. "The night I left, he'd been drinking all day. He was angry because I'd spoken to the store clerk for too long when buying supplies. He accused me of improper behavior. When I denied it, well, you saw what he did to my face. That wasn't the worst of it." Frank's hands tightened on the reins, his knuckles white. "If I ever meet this man, no," Sarah interrupted firmly. "That's exactly what I don't want." Violence answered with more violence. "It never solves anything." She reached out hesitantly and placed her hand on his arm. "You've shown me there's another way to be, Frank, a way based on kindness and respect. That means more to me than any act of vengeance ever could." The tension in Frank's shoulders eased slightly. He covered her hand with his own briefly before returning it to the reins. "You're right, of course, but it's hard not to want to protect someone you care about." "I know," Sarah said softly, "but tonight isn't for dwelling on the past. You promised me a dance, Mr. Owens, and I intend to hold you to it." Frank's smile returned. "Yes, madam." The barn was transformed for the harvest dance, with lanterns hanging from the rafters, bales of hay arranged for seating, and a small platform where local musicians played lively tunes. Couples of all ages filled the dance floor, from teenagers experiencing their first social outing to elderly couples who had been dancing together for decades. Sarah felt a moment of panic as they entered. So many people, so many eyes that might recognize her if Benjamin had extended his search this far. But Frank seemed to sense her anxiety and kept close to her side, his solid presence reassuring. "Frank Owens. About time you showed your face at one of these gatherings," a booming voice called out. A broad-shouldered man with a thick mustache approached them, clapping Frank on the back. "And with a lady, no less. Wonders never cease." "Tom Wilson, this is Miss Sarah James," Frank said, performing the introduction smoothly. "Sarah, Tom owns the general store in Centerville and fancies himself the local welcoming committee." "Pleased to meet you, Miss James," Tom said with a gallant bow. "Any friend of Frank's is welcome here. Now, you two better get out there and dance before all the good tunes are gone." Frank raised an eyebrow at Sarah. "Shall we?" The dance was a simple country reel, nothing too complicated, but it had been years since Sarah had danced at all. She followed Frank's lead tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as the music swept them along. By the end of the song, she was breathless and smiling, a genuine smile that reached her eyes for perhaps the first time since Frank had known her. They danced several more dances, stopping occasionally for refreshments or to catch their breath. Frank introduced Sarah to a few people he knew, but didn't press her to socialize extensively, understanding her caution. As the evening progressed, the music slowed, and couples drew closer together for more intimate dances. "One more?" Frank asked as the fiddles began a gentle waltz. Sarah nodded, allowing him to lead her back to the dance floor. This dance was different. Frank's hand at her waist, her hand on his shoulder, their other hands clasped together. They moved in perfect rhythm, as if they'd been dancing together for years rather than hours. "Thank you for bringing me tonight," Sarah said, looking up at him. "I'd forgotten what it feels like to simply enjoy an evening." "The pleasure is all mine," Frank replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "You deserve every happiness, Sarah. I hope you know that." In that moment, with the music swirling around them and Frank's earnest gaze upon her, Sarah allowed herself to believe it might be true. That she might deserve happiness. That she might find it here with this man who treated her with unfailing kindness and respect. The ride back to the Peterson ranch was quiet but comfortable, both of them wrapped in their own thoughts yet acutely aware of each other's presence. When they reached Sarah's cabin, Frank helped her down from the buggy, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Would you like to come in for some coffee?" Sarah asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Frank smiled. "I'd like that very much." Inside, Sarah busied herself preparing the coffee while Frank built up the fire against the late October chill. When she brought the steaming cups to the table, he was waiting, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about your situation," he said as she sat across from him. "About Benjamin." Sarah tensed slightly. "I'd rather not discuss him tonight, not after such a wonderful evening." "I understand," Frank said quickly, "but I think I might have a solution if you're willing to hear me out." Sarah took a sip of her coffee, then nodded cautiously. "Go on." "My brother's a lawyer in Boise," Frank explained. "I wrote to him about your situation, no details, just the general circumstances. He says there might be a way to file for divorce without you having to appear in court or even reveal your location." Sarah's heart quickened. "How is that possible?" "It's complicated, and I won't pretend to understand all the legal aspects. But essentially, you could provide a sworn affidavit about the abuse, supported by witness statements from those who saw your condition when you arrived here. My brother would represent you in court. Benjamin would be served papers, but he wouldn't know where to find you." "And if the divorce is granted," Sarah asked, hardly daring to hope, "then you'd be legally free of him. He'd have no claim on you, not in the eyes of the law or anyone else." Sarah set her cup down carefully, her hands trembling slightly. "It sounds too good to be true. What are the chances it would work?" "Robert, my brother, says it's not guaranteed, but with evidence of extreme cruelty, which you certainly have, the chances are good. Especially with a sympathetic judge, and he knows which ones might be most receptive. Even if it works, Benjamin won't simply accept it and move on," Sarah warned. "He'll be furious." Frank leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Sarah, I know you're scared, you have every right to be. But you can't live your whole life looking over your shoulder, waiting for him to find you. This could be your chance at real freedom." Sarah stood and moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames as she considered Frank's words. He was right, she couldn't run forever. Sooner or later, Benjamin would either find her or she would have to start a new life somewhere far away, alone. "If I did this," she said finally, turning back to Frank, "would you? Would you stay with me through it? I don't think I could face it alone." Frank rose and crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "Sarah, I would stand by you through anything, not because you need me to, but because I want to." He took a deep breath. "I care for you deeply, more than I've ever cared for anyone. Whatever you decide about the divorce, that won't change." Sarah looked up into his face, reading the sincerity there. In that moment, she made her decision. "Write to your brother, tell him I want to proceed with the divorce." Frank squeezed her hands gently. "You're the bravest person I know, Sarah James." "I don't feel brave," she confessed. "I feel terrified, but also hopeful, and that's something I haven't felt in a very long time." The process of filing for divorce proved more complicated than Frank had initially explained, but true to his word, he remained steadfastly by Sarah's side through every step. Robert Owens came from Boise to meet with Sarah personally, taking her statement about Benjamin's abuse and gathering supporting testimony from Peterson, Mrs. Wilkins, and Frank himself, all of whom had seen the evidence of Benjamin's cruelty written on Sarah's body when she first arrived. "It's a strong case," Robert assured her after their meeting. "The judge I have in mind has a daughter who recently left an abusive marriage. He's sympathetic to situations like yours." "And Benjamin won't know where I am?" Sarah asked anxiously. "He'll know you've filed for divorce, but the papers will be served through my office. Your location won't be disclosed." Robert gathered his notes. "This won't be quick, Sarah. Legal proceedings rarely are, but I promise to do everything in my power to secure your freedom." As Robert predicted, the process moved slowly. November turned to December, and winter settled over the Idaho Territory. Christmas approached, bringing with it preparations for holiday celebrations at the Peterson ranch. Sarah threw herself into these activities, grateful for the distraction from the constant worry about Benjamin and the divorce proceedings. One snowy evening a week before Christmas, Frank invited Sarah for a sleigh ride. Bundled in warm blankets against the cold, they glided across the snow-covered landscape, the only sounds the jingling of the sleigh bells and the soft whoosh of the runners over the snow. "I have something for you," Frank said as they paused at the crest of a hill overlooking the ranch. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a red ribbon. "An early Christmas gift." Sarah accepted the package with surprise. "But I haven't gotten anything for you yet." "Your company is all the gift I need," Frank replied with a smile. "Open it." Sarah carefully untied the ribbon and unwrapped the paper to reveal a small wooden box. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, was a silver locket on a delicate chain. "Oh, Frank," she breathed, lifting it carefully. "It's beautiful." "Open it," he encouraged her. Inside the locket was a tiny pressed forget-me-not, its blue petals still vibrant against the silver backing. "I picked it the day after you arrived at the ranch," Frank explained, a slight flush coloring his cheeks that had nothing to do with the cold. "I wanted to give you something pretty, but I was afraid you'd misinterpret the gesture, so I pressed it in a book, thinking that someday, perhaps." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Will you help me put it on?" Frank took the locket from her hands, and Sarah turned, lifting her hair away from her neck. His fingers were gentle as he fastened the clasp, lingering for a moment at the nape of her neck. When she turned back to face him, the locket gleamed against her coat. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for the locket, but for everything. For finding me that night at the church, for bringing me to the ranch, for standing by me through all of this." Frank's eyes were serious as he looked down at her. "Sarah, there's something I need to say." He took her gloved hands in his. "These past months, getting to know you, seeing your strength and courage, I've fallen in love with you." The words hung in the crisp winter air between them. Sarah's heart beat rapidly in her chest, a mixture of joy and fear coursing through her. "Frank, I care for you too, deeply." "But I'm still married, and even with the divorce, I know," he interrupted gently. "I'm not asking for anything right now. I just wanted you to know how I feel. When the time is right, if the time is ever right, I'll be here, however long it takes." Sarah leaned forward and pressed her lips to his cheek, a brief, chaste gesture that nonetheless conveyed the depth of her feelings. "Thank you for understanding, and for being patient with me." Frank smiled, squeezing her hands before releasing them to take up the reins again. "Always." Christmas came and went, followed by a new year, 1877. January brought heavy snow that isolated the Peterson ranch for weeks, making travel to and from Idaho City nearly impossible. It was mid-February before Robert Owens was able to make the journey to bring news of the divorce proceedings. "The papers have been served," he informed Sarah as they sat in Peterson's parlor. "Benjamin contested it, of course, claimed the allegations were false." Sarah's hands twisted anxiously in her lap. "What happens now?" "The judge has set a court date for April." As we discussed, you won't need to appear in person. Your written testimony and the supporting statements should be sufficient. Robert hesitated. There is one complication, however. Benjamin is claiming you took property that belongs to him when you left. What property? Sarah exclaimed. I took nothing but my own clothes and my mother's locket, and the money, Frank reminded her gently. The egg money you'd saved. $10.37, Sarah confirmed. Hardly a fortune, and it was money I earned myself. Robert made a note. I'll argue that in court. It's a tactic, Sarah, nothing more. He's trying to delay the proceedings, perhaps hoping you'll give up or reveal your location. I won't, Sarah said firmly. Not after coming this far. As the weeks passed, Sarah fell into a comfortable routine at the Peterson ranch. Her laundry duties expanded to include managing the household linens for the main house, a position of trust that Alina granted her with evident approval. She began teaching young Amy Wilson, the blacksmith's daughter, to sew, finding unexpected joy in passing on her skills to the next generation. And always there was Frank, a steady presence in her life. They took meals together often, went for rides on clear days, and spent evenings by the fire in her cabin, talking about everything and nothing. He never pressed for more than she was ready to give, respecting the boundaries she set, while making his feelings clear through 1,000 small gestures of care and consideration. March brought the first signs of spring to the Idaho Territory, with snowdrops pushing through the melting snow and longer, sunnier days that lifted everyone's spirits after the long winter. Robert Owens rode out from Boise with more news about the divorce case. The judge denied Benjamin's claim about the money, he reported, spreading papers on Alina's dining table for Sarah to see. And he's inclined to grant the divorce based on the evidence of cruelty. There's just one more hurdle. Benjamin is demanding the right to cross-examine you directly. Sarah's face paled. No, I can't face him. I won't. You won't have to, Robert assured her quickly. I've already argued that such a confrontation would be potentially dangerous given his history of violence. The judge is sympathetic but wants more evidence to support denying Benjamin this right. What kind of evidence? Frank asked, his hand finding Sarah's under the table and squeezing gently. Medical testimony would be ideal, Robert said. A doctor who examined Sarah after the abuse and could testify to the extent of her injuries. Sarah shook her head. I never saw a doctor. Not once in all those years. What about when you first came here? Alina suggested. Doc Harris came out to look at your ribs, remember? It was true Alina had insisted on having the local physician examine Sarah a few days after her arrival, concerned about the extent of her injuries. But that was months ago, Sarah pointed out. Would his testimony still be relevant? Absolutely, Robert confirmed. If he made notes about your condition and is willing to testify, it could be exactly what we need. Dr. William Harris, a gruff but kind-hearted man in his 60s who served the rural communities around Idaho City, readily agreed to provide testimony. I remember the case clearly, he told Robert when they met. Multiple contusions, 2 cracked ribs, evidence of previous injuries that had healed poorly. Classic signs of prolonged abuse. I'd be happy to testify to that effect. With this final piece of evidence secured, the case proceeded to its scheduled court date in early April. Sarah remained at the Peterson ranch, waiting anxiously for word from Robert. Frank took time away from his ranch duties to stay with her, recognizing that despite her brave front, the waiting was taking its toll. On a warm April afternoon, a rider approached the ranch at a gallop. Sarah, who had been hanging laundry outside her cabin, froze at the sight, her heart pounding with fear that somehow Benjamin had found her at last. But as the rider drew closer, she recognized Robert Owens' tall figure and dark bay horse. Frank emerged from the barn where he'd been mending harnesses and hurried to her side. Together they waited as Robert dismounted and approached, his expression unreadable. Well, Frank asked as his brother reached them. Robert looked at Sarah directly. It's done. The judge granted the divorce on grounds of extreme cruelty. You're a free woman, Sarah. The words didn't register immediately. After months of anxiety, of looking over her shoulder, of fearing that Benjamin would somehow prevent this outcome, the simple statement seemed almost anticlimactic. Truly, it's over. Legally, yes, Robert confirmed, reaching into his saddlebag to withdraw a document. Here's the decree. Benjamin Johnson no longer has any claim on you. Sarah took the paper with trembling hands, reading the formal legal language that severed her ties to the man who had caused her so much pain. Tears blurred her vision, not tears of sadness, but of profound relief. What about Benjamin? Frank asked his brother. How did he react? Robert's expression darkened. Not well. He made a scene in the courthouse, accused the judge of corruption, threatened to find Sarah no matter what it took. He turned to Sarah apologetically. I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but I think you should be prepared. He's not accepting this ruling gracefully. Sarah nodded, having expected as much. But he doesn't know where I am. No, Robert assured her. I was very careful about that. However, he hesitated, exchanging a glance with his brother. What is it? Sarah asked, sensing there was more. Benjamin was overheard in a saloon in Idaho City last night, offering a substantial reward for information about your whereabouts, Robert admitted. He's making it known that he intends to find you, divorce or no divorce. The happiness Sarah had felt moments earlier dimmed at this news. Then I'm not truly free after all. You are, Frank said firmly, taking her hand. The law is on your side now. If he comes near you, he can be arrested for trespassing or harassment. You have rights, Sarah, and we'll make sure they're protected. Sarah looked down at the divorce decree in her hand, then up at the two brothers watching her with concern. I won't let fear rule my life anymore, she declared. This is my home now, and I won't be driven from it by his threats. Frank's face lit up with pride at her words. That's my girl. Despite her brave declaration, practical precautions were taken. Peterson assigned one of the ranch hands to patrol the property boundaries regularly. Frank moved temporarily into the bunkhouse to be closer if needed, and Sarah was advised not to go into town alone. Life continued at the Peterson ranch, but with an undercurrent of vigilance that couldn't be ignored. April turned to May, bringing with it an explosion of wildflowers across the Idaho countryside. On a particularly beautiful Saturday, Frank invited Sarah for a picnic in a meadow not far from her cabin. The day was perfect warm sunshine, a gentle breeze, and the sweet scent of spring blossoms filling the air. They spread a blanket beneath a large cottonwood tree, enjoying a simple meal of cold chicken, biscuits, and Mrs. Wilkins' apple pie. Sarah had grown more comfortable with Frank's company over the months, and they talked and laughed easily together, the shadow of Benjamin's threats temporarily forgotten. After they had eaten, Frank grew uncharacteristically quiet, fidgeting with a wildflower he had plucked from the meadow. Is something wrong? Sarah asked, noticing his unusual demeanor. Frank shook his head, then seemed to come to a decision. He set the flower aside and took her hands in his. Sarah, these past months have been the happiest of my life, despite all the difficulties. Getting to know you, seeing your courage and resilience, watching you build a new life here, it's been a privilege. Sarah smiled, her heart warming at his words. For me as well, Frank. I don't know what would have become of me if you hadn't found me that night. You'd have found your way, he said with certainty. That's who you are, a survivor. He took a deep breath. But I hope that surviving isn't all you want from life now. I hope you might consider the possibility of happiness, of love. Sarah's pulse quickened as Frank released her hands only to reach into his pocket. When he withdrew a small ring with a simple pearl set in silver, she gasped softly. I know it's soon, he said quickly. I know you've only just gained your freedom, and the last thing I want is to make you feel rushed or pressured. But I love you, Sarah. I think I've loved you since that first night when you were bruised and frightened but still had the courage to take a chance on a stranger's kindness. He held the ring between them, not yet offering it directly. This was my mother's. She gave it to me before she died, said I should give it to the woman who captured my heart. That's you, Sarah. You've reminded me what it means to be a good man, to protect without controlling, to support without demanding. Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she listened to his heartfelt declaration. Frank, I'm not asking for an answer today, he continued, or even tomorrow. I'm simply telling you that whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready, I want to make a life with you. A life based on mutual respect and love, a partnership in every sense of the word. Sarah looked at the pearl ring, then up at Frank's earnest face. In the months she had known him, he had never once raised his voice to her, never made her feel less than his equal, never expected her gratitude for treating her with basic human decency. He had shown her what love should be: patient, kind, and respectful. Ask me, she said softly, her heart full. Frank's eyes widened. You mean? Sarah nodded, a smile breaking through her tears. Ask me properly, Frank Owens. Frank slid from the blanket onto one knee, holding the ring up toward her. Sarah James, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Not to replace the freedom you've just won, but to share it with me, to build something beautiful together. Yes, Sarah whispered, then louder. Yes, Frank, I will marry you. His face lit up with joy as he slipped the pearl ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Frank rose from his knee only to gather Sarah into his arms, his embrace gentle yet secure. When their lips met for the first time, Sarah felt no fear, only a sense of homecoming, of rightness that she had never experienced before. They agreed to a short engagement, not wanting to wait too long for their new beginning together. Peterson was delighted by the news and immediately began planning a celebration to be held at the ranch. Nothing fancy, she assured Sarah, who was uncomfortable with the idea of being the center of attention. Just the people who care about you both. Word of the engagement spread quickly among the ranch hands and the surrounding community. Congratulations poured in, along with offers of help for the upcoming wedding. Sarah was touched by the genuine warmth these people showed her, many of whom had been strangers just months ago. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in June, giving them just a few weeks to prepare. Sarah, with Alina's help, began work on a simple wedding dress, using fine cream-colored cotton ordered specially from boys. Frank, meanwhile, threw himself into building an addition onto Sarah's cabin, their cabin now, to create a proper home for them both. 2 weeks before the wedding, Sarah ventured into Centerville with Alina and Mrs. Wilkins to purchase final supplies for the celebration. It was her first trip to any town since the dance months earlier, and despite her nerves, she enjoyed the outing, feeling almost normal as they browsed the general store and ordered a special cake from the baker's wife. They were loading their purchases into the wagon when Sarah noticed a stranger watching her from across the street, a tall man leaning against the hitching post outside the saloon. Something about his posture, the way he stood with his weight shifted to one hip, sent a chill of recognition down her spine. Alina, she said quietly, not taking her eyes from the man, I think we should leave. Now. Alina followed her gaze, instantly understanding. Get in the wagon, quickly, she murmured, helping Mrs. Wilkins with the last of the packages. Don't look at him again. But it was too late. The man had pushed away from the hitching post and was crossing the street toward them, his gait familiar in a way that made Sarah's blood run cold. As he came closer, there was no mistaking him. Benjamin Johnson, his face twisted into a smile that held no warmth. Well, well, he drawled, stopping a few feet from the wagon. If it isn't my runaway wife, you're looking well, Sarah, better than when I saw you last. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest, but she forced herself to stand straight, meeting his gaze directly. I'm not your wife anymore, Benjamin. The courts granted me a divorce. Benjamin's smile tightened. A piece of paper doesn't change what's mine. His eyes flicked to the pearl ring on Sarah's finger. Found yourself a replacement already, I see. Poor fellow doesn't know what he's getting, a disobedient, ungrateful woman who runs at the first sign of trouble. Alina stepped forward, positioning herself slightly in front of Sarah. Mr. Johnson, I presume? I'm Alina Peterson. Sarah works for me at my ranch. I suggest you move along before we call the sheriff. Benjamin's gaze hardened as it shifted to Alina. This is a private matter between me and my wife, madam. Best stay out of it. Ex-wife, Sarah corrected, finding courage in Alina's steady presence. And there's nothing private to discuss. Please leave us alone, Benjamin. For a moment, Benjamin looked as if he might lunge for her, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Then his expression smoothed, becoming almost pleasant again. I hear there's to be a wedding. First Saturday in June, isn't it? Perhaps I'll come offer my congratulations in person. The threat in his words was unmistakable. Sarah felt her newfound courage faltering, but Alina was already climbing into the wagon, gesturing for her to follow. Good day, Mr. Johnson. Sarah, let's get back to the ranch. Frank will be wondering where we are. At Frank's name, Benjamin's eyes narrowed. Frank Owens. The cowboy who thinks he can take what's mine. Tell him I look forward to meeting him. Sarah climbed into the wagon with shaking hands, refusing to give Benjamin the satisfaction of seeing how deeply he had rattled her. As Alina flicked the reins and the wagon pulled away, she felt Benjamin's eyes boring into her back, his unspoken promise hanging in the air between them. The encounter cast a pall over what should have been a happy time. When they returned to the ranch and told Frank what had happened, his face darkened with anger. I'll ride into town, have a word with the sheriff. Benjamin Johnson needs to understand that harassment won't be tolerated. No, Sarah said firmly, placing a hand on his arm. That's what he wants to provoke you to cause trouble. The best thing we can do is proceed with our plans. Show him that he has no power over us. Frank looked unconvinced, but he respected Sarah's wishes. Nevertheless, security around the ranch was tightened. The ranch hands took turns keeping watch, especially at night, and Sarah was never left alone. The joyful anticipation of the wedding was tempered by the constant awareness of Benjamin's threat. The week before the wedding, Frank's brother Robert arrived from Boise, bringing with him a legal document. It's a restraining order, he explained as they gathered in Alina's parlor. It forbids Benjamin Johnson from coming within 100 yards of Sarah, the Peterson ranch, or any property owned by the Owens family. Sarah looked at the paper skeptically. Will a piece of paper stop him if he's determined? Not by itself, Robert acknowledged. But it gives the law a reason to arrest him if he violates it. I've already filed copies with the sheriffs in Idaho City, Centerville, and Boise. It was a small comfort, but better than nothing. As the wedding day approached, Sarah tried to focus on her future with Frank rather than the shadow Benjamin cast over their happiness. The addition to the cabin was completed, doubling its size and adding a proper kitchen and a second bedroom for the future, as Frank had said with a hopeful smile. The day before the wedding, a package arrived for Sarah from Boise. Inside was a beautiful white lace veil with a note from Robert's wife, Catherine. Every bride deserves something special on her wedding day. Welcome to the family, Sarah. The gesture brought tears to Sarah's eyes. A family, something she had longed for since losing her parents, something Benjamin had promised, but never provided. With Frank, she had found not just love but belonging, a place in a web of relationships based on genuine care rather than obligation or fear. The first Saturday in June dawned clear and warm, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers across the Peterson ranch. Sarah woke early, a mixture of excitement and nervousness fluttering in her stomach. Today she would become Sarah Owens, a name untainted by painful memories, a fresh beginning. Alina and Mrs. Wilkins arrived at the cabin shortly after sunrise to help Sarah prepare. Her wedding dress, simple but elegant with its high collar and delicate embroidery around the hem, hung ready on the wardrobe door. The veil from Catherine Owens was carefully arranged on the table beside the small mirror. You look beautiful, my dear, Alina said softly as she helped Sarah into the dress. Frank won't be able to take his eyes off you. Sarah smoothed the fabric nervously. Do you think anyone will notice that it's not white? That cream was all we could get, Alina laughed. Only a woman would notice such a detail, and every woman here knows how little time we had to prepare. Besides, it suits your coloring perfectly. The morning passed in a blur of activity. The ranch hands had transformed the area between the main house and the barn into a festive space, with benches arranged in rows facing a simple arch woven with wildflowers. Lanterns hung from the trees, ready to be lit when evening fell. Mrs. Wilkins directed the preparation of a feast that would feed everyone twice over. By early afternoon, guests began to arrive, families from neighboring ranches, shopkeepers from Centerville, and a few of Frank's friends from Idaho City. Pastor Williams, who had returned from Boise months ago, would perform the ceremony. Each arrival was carefully watched by the ranch hands stationed at strategic points around the property, but there was no sign of Benjamin Johnson. As the appointed hour approached, Sarah stood in Aliner's bedroom in the main house, where she had come to make her final preparations away from Frank's eyes. Frank Owens, who had arrived with Robert the day before, helped her with the veil while Aliner pinned a spray of wildflowers to her bodice. "Are you nervous?" Catherine asked with a knowing smile. "A little," Sarah admitted. "Not about marrying Frank, that feels more right than anything in my life, but with Benjamin's threat. Don't give him the power to overshadow this day," Aliner advised firmly. "The men are watching for him, and the sheriff himself is among the guests. This is your day, Sarah, yours and Frank's." A soft knock at the door announced that it was time. Robert Owens, who had offered to walk Sarah to the altar in the absence of her own family, waited in the hallway. "Ready?" he asked. When Aliner opened the door, Sarah took a deep breath, forcing thoughts of Benjamin from her mind. "Ready." The wedding was simple but beautiful. As Sarah walked toward the flower-adorned arch where Frank waited, she saw nothing but his face, his eyes shining with love and pride as he watched her approach. Pastor Williams spoke of commitment, respect, and partnership, words that held special meaning for a woman who had known the opposite of these things in her previous marriage. When it came time for the vows, Frank's voice rang clear and true. "I, Frank Owens, take you, Sarah James, to be my lawful wedded wife. I promise to love and cherish you, to respect and support you, to stand by your side in good times and bad, for as long as we both shall live." Sarah's own vows, spoken with quiet certainty, brought tears to many eyes. "I, Sarah James, take you, Frank Owens, to be my lawful wedded husband. I promise to love and cherish you, to respect and support you, to build a life of trust and partnership with you, for as long as we both shall live." The exchange of rings, Sarah's pearl engagement ring joined by a simple gold band, Frank receiving a matching band that had belonged to Aliner's late husband, sealed their commitment. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Frank's kiss was gentle but full of promise, a beginning rather than an end. The celebration that followed was joyful and relaxed. Tables laden with food were set up near the dance area, where a small group of musicians played lively tunes. Frank and Sarah moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes, their hands rarely separating as if they couldn't bear to lose the physical connection that symbolized their union. As the sun began to set, lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow over the festivities. Frank led Sarah to the center of the dance area for their first dance as husband and wife, a slow waltz that reminded them both of the harvest dance where they had first acknowledged their feelings for each other. "Happy, Mrs. Owens," Frank murmured as they moved together in perfect harmony. "More than I ever thought possible," Sarah replied, her heart so full it seemed impossible that it wouldn't simply burst from joy. The evening progressed with more dancing, stories, and laughter. Aliner had arranged for Sarah and Frank to spend their wedding night at the main house, giving them privacy that the cabin, despite its new addition, couldn't quite provide with so many guests still on the property. As the celebration began to wind down, with some guests departing and others settling in at various spots around the ranch for the night, Frank took Sarah's hand. "Ready to slip away?" Sarah nodded, eager for their first moments alone as husband and wife. They made their goodbyes, accepting final congratulations and enduring good-natured teasing from some of the ranch hands. Hand in hand, they walked toward the main house, the sounds of music and laughter fading behind them. They had just reached the front porch when a figure stepped out from the shadows beside the house. Benjamin Johnson stood blocking their path, a pistol in his hand. "Isn't this touching?" he drawled, his words slightly slurred. "The blushing bride and her cowboy hero." Frank immediately pushed Sarah behind him, shielding her with his body. "Johnson," he acknowledged, his voice steady despite the threat, "you're violating a restraining order. The sheriff's just down the hill. I suggest you leave while you can." Benjamin's laugh held no humor. "Oh, I'll leave." "But I'm not going alone," he gestured with the pistol. "Sarah's coming with me, where she belongs." "That's not going to happen," Frank replied, his stance widening slightly as if preparing for a fight. Sarah peered around Frank's shoulder, meeting Benjamin's gaze directly. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Benjamin. I'm not your wife anymore. I'm Frank's wife now, legally and in every other way that matters." Benjamin's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful whore. After everything I did for you, this is how you repay me. Running off with the first man who smiles at you. Everything you did for me," Sarah repeated, a newfound strength in her voice as she stepped out from behind Frank, ignoring his attempt to keep her shielded. "You beat me. You belittled me. You made me fear for my life. Frank has shown me what a real husband should be: kind, respectful, supportive." "Sarah," Frank warned, trying to pull her back, but Sarah had found her courage at last. 3 years of abuse, months of fear and hiding all of it, had led to this moment of confrontation that she realized now was inevitable. "You have no power over me anymore, Benjamin. None." Benjamin's hand tightened on the pistol. "We'll see about that." He raised the weapon, aiming it directly at Sarah's heart. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Frank lunged forward, trying to knock the pistol away. Benjamin fired. The sound of the shot echoed across the ranch, followed immediately by shouts as people ran toward the source of the disturbance. Frank staggered, clutching his shoulder where the bullet had struck him. Sarah screamed, rushing to support him as he sagged against her. Benjamin, momentarily stunned that he had shot someone, hesitated, a fatal mistake. From the darkness behind him came a solid thud, and Benjamin crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Peterson stood over him, holding a heavy fireplace poker. "I've wanted to do that since I heard what he did to you," she said grimly. The sheriff and several ranch hands arrived moments later, taking in the scene quickly. As Benjamin was bound and taken into custody, still unconscious, Sarah focused entirely on Frank, terrified that she had lost her new husband on their wedding day. "It's not bad," Frank assured her through gritted teeth as the doctor, who had thankfully been among the wedding guests, examined the wound. "Went straight through, missed anything important." "He's right," Dr. Harris confirmed. "Clean wound, no major damage. He'll need rest and careful tending, but he should heal completely." The relief that flooded Sarah was so intense she nearly collapsed herself. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered as Frank was helped into the house and settled in Alina's guest bedroom, their wedding chamber converted into a sick room. "Takes more than a bullet to separate me from my bride," Frank replied with a wan smile. "Not exactly how I pictured our wedding night, though." Dr. Harris cleaned and bandaged the wound, administered laudanum for the pain, and left strict instructions for Frank's care before returning to the remaining wedding guests to assure them that the groom would recover. Sarah sat beside the bed, holding Frank's uninjured hand as the laudanum took effect and he drifted into sleep. Alina brought her a chair and a blanket, suggesting she try to rest as well, but Sarah couldn't bear to leave Frank's side. "He shot Frank because of me," she said numbly. "This is my fault." "Nonsense," Alina replied firmly. "Benjamin Johnson is responsible for his own actions, not you, never you." She squeezed Sarah's shoulder gently. "Frank's going to be fine, and Benjamin will face justice for this attempted murder of a man on his own wedding day." Not even the most lenient judge will look kindly on that. Indeed, Benjamin Johnson faced swift justice. With multiple witnesses to the shooting, including the sheriff himself, there was no question of his guilt. He was tried and sentenced to 10 years in the territorial prison, effectively removing the threat he posed to Sarah and Frank's future together. Frank's recovery was slower than he would have liked, but steady. Sarah tended him devotedly, changing his bandages, preparing nourishing meals, and reading to him during the long hours of enforced rest. By mid-July, he was able to return to light duties around the ranch, though Sarah watched him like a hawk, insistent that he not overexert himself. Their delayed wedding trip finally took place in August, a week in Boise with Robert and Catherine, who showed them the sights of the territorial capital and introduced them to their circle of friends. It was Sarah's first time in a real city since her marriage to Benjamin, and she found herself enjoying the bustling streets, the shops, and the sense of anonymity that came with being just another couple among many. "We could stay," Frank suggested one evening as they sat on the porch of Robert's comfortable home. "Robert says there's a place for me in his law office if I want it. You could have a fresh start, away from the memories." Sarah considered the offer seriously. Life in Boise would certainly be different, more comfortable in many ways, with amenities the ranch couldn't provide. But as she thought about it, she realized that the Peterson ranch had become home in a way no place had been since her parents' farm in Kansas. "I think," she said slowly, "that I'd rather go back. The ranch is where we found each other, where I found myself again. Besides, Alina needs us, she's not getting any younger, and the ranch is too much for her to manage alone." Frank smiled, taking her hand. "I hoped you'd say that. The city's nice to visit, but the ranch is home." When they returned to the Peterson ranch, it was to news that would change their lives once again. Alina, who had been considering her future for some time, made them an offer over dinner their first night back. "I'm getting old," she announced without preamble. "This ranch was William's dream more than mine, and while I've kept it going since he passed, it's time for new blood." She looked at them directly. "I want you two to take over, not just managing it, owning it. I'll sign over the deed, keep a small portion for myself to live on, and you'll make it yours." Frank and Sarah exchanged startled glances. "Alina, that's incredibly generous," Frank began, "but we couldn't possibly—" "You can and you will," Alina interrupted firmly. "Who else would I leave it to? I have no children of my own. You, Frank, have been like a son to me these past 5 years. And Sarah, well, you're the daughter I never had." Her expression softened. "Think about it. This could be your legacy, something to build together and pass on to your children someday." Children. The word hung in the air, full of promise. Sarah and Frank had spoken of having a family someday, but somehow it had seemed a distant dream, something for the future after they had established themselves. Now, with Alina's offer, that future suddenly seemed much closer. "We'll think about it," Sarah promised, though in her heart, she already knew what their answer would be. The transition happened gradually over the following months. Frank took on more responsibility for the day-to-day management of the ranch, while Sarah expanded her role beyond laundry to include keeping the books and overseeing household matters. Alina remained involved but stepped back, clearly enjoying watching the young couple make the ranch their own. In December, as they prepared for their first Christmas as husband and wife, Sarah had a special gift for Frank. After the main house had been decorated with evergreen boughs, and the traditional Christmas Eve dinner was concluded, she led him to their cabin, now a cozy home that reflected both their personalities. By the fire, with the scent of pine filling the air and candlelight casting a warm glow over the room, Sarah placed Frank's hand on her still flat stomach. "Merry Christmas, Frank. We're going to have a baby." Frank's expression transformed from confusion to wonder to pure joy in the space of a heartbeat. "A baby, you're sure?" Sarah nodded, her own happiness reflected in his eyes. "Dr. Harris confirmed it yesterday. He says the baby should arrive in early summer." Frank gathered her into a gentle embrace, mindful of her condition even though there was no physical evidence of it yet. "A baby," he repeated in awe. "Our baby." As they held each other before the fire, Sarah marveled at how far she had come in just over a year. From a desperate, abused woman fleeing for her life to a beloved wife and soon-to-be mother, with a home and family that were everything she had ever dreamed of. Benjamin Johnson, she knew, would eventually be released from prison. But that was years away, and when it happened, she would face that challenge with Frank by her side, secure in the knowledge that she was strong enough to overcome whatever life might bring. For now, though, there was only this moment: the crackling fire, Frank's arms around her, and the tiny new life growing within her. A life that would be born into love and respect, never knowing the fear and pain that had marked so much of Sarah's own existence. "Thank you," she whispered against Frank's chest. "For what?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her hair. "For finding me that night, for bringing me here, for showing me what love is supposed to be." Frank tilted her face up to his eyes shining with emotion. "No, Sarah. Thank you for being brave enough to start over, to trust again. You've given me more than I ever thought possible." As their lips met in a tender kiss, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that this was what happily ever after felt like: not a fairy tale ending, but a beginning built on mutual respect, partnership, and love that grew stronger with each passing day. The baby, a healthy boy they named William Franklin Owens after both Aliner's late husband and his father, arrived on a sunny June morning in 1878, almost exactly a year after their wedding. He had Sarah's honey blonde hair and Frank's blue eyes, a perfect blend of them both. Over the years that followed, the Peterson ranch gradually becoming known as the Owens Ranch prospered under Frank and Sarah's management. Aliner lived to see not only William but also the birth of twin girls, Emma and Elizabeth, 2 years later, delighting in her role as honorary grandmother. Sarah's fears about Benjamin's eventual release from prison never materialized. He died in his 6th year of incarceration, a fact that brought her no joy but did bring final closure to that chapter of her life. And on cool autumn evenings, when the children were asleep and the day's work was done, Sarah and Frank would often sit on the porch of their expanded home, watching the stars appear above the Idaho hills. In those quiet moments, Sarah would sometimes think of the desperate young woman who had stumbled into the churchyard that night so long ago, and marvel at how a single act of kindness had changed the course of her life forever. "Happy?" Frank would ask, as he always did, his arm around her shoulders, his presence as steady and reassuring as it had been from the beginning, and Sarah would lean into his embrace, complete in a way she had once thought impossible. "More than words can say."